All right, so we should be live streaming from Facebook and YouTube. We are going to be talking about Natural History Thursday today, some lizards and snakes of Alabama. We're just going to take a few seconds to make sure and verify that we are, in fact, live streaming from Facebook and YouTube, but we should be. So we're just going to take a little second to verify those things. Hope everyone is having a great week, and let us know where you're listening and watching from. And we will get started here in a second. So it does look like we are live on Facebook, as we should be. And I'm just going to verify that on YouTube before we get started. If you would prefer to watch on YouTube, you can go to youtube.com/UA Museums. And when you're over there, make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of the video that we put out or any of the live streams that we've been doing. So it does look like we are, in fact, live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. So that is good to go. So Dr. Friel, are we ready to go? You want to go ahead and get started?
I'm ready to get started, Rebecca.
All right.
If you want, you can pull up my presentation.
Well, I can go ahead and do a little intro, and then we'll get into the presentation that way. So I'll go ahead and get us started, and we'll get this rocking and rolling. Welcome to today's Museums from Your Home live stream presented by the University of Alabama Museums. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I am the Communication Specialist for UA Museums. And today I am joined by Dr. John Friel, who is the Director of the Alabama Museum of Natural History, to talk about the lizards and snakes of Alabama. You doing all right today, John?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing pretty well. I'm excited to learn about lizards and snakes because I don't know much about them. So this is going to be a lot of fun for me. So I hope everybody else enjoys it as well. Well,
it should be fun. I think this time of year, it's really appropriate. We have a lot of springtime activity, and I've seen several snakes already this year, and hopefully some of our viewers out there have seen them as well and have some questions.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder. So if you do have some questions about any of the lizards and snakes that we're going to be talking about today, feel free to drop us a question or a comment in the comment section. And just as a reminder, this is live, so anything can happen. So hang in there with us in case we have any issues. And so now that we've gotten all of our business out of the way, let's get talking about some lizards and snakes.
Yeah, so my goal today is to present maybe a general overview for lizards and snakes. Obviously, there isn't sufficient time in the kind of hours so we'll have together to talk about every single species. But the idea is I really just want to give people an idea of the diversity we have in the state. Obviously, one of the topics I'll talk about are venomous reptiles, venomous snakes in particular, because that's, I know from my own experience dealing with museum visitors and the public, is that a lot of people have concerns about venomous snakes. So I want to basically educate people about identification of those, some of the misunderstandings about snakes. But the idea is I want to encourage you. In most cases, lizard snakes aren't going to provide any kind of harm to you or your family, but there is the potential, there is a risk there, and I just want to educate the public and give them an idea for why we want to protect these really interesting animals. So the talk today is called Lizards and Snakes of Alabama. I wanted to put it in context. So here's a little slide I pulled off the web about a group that is conserving amphibians reptiles in Alabama, but we're going to focus on reptiles today. And within the state of Alabama, there are approximately 40 species of snakes and about 15 species of lizards. We also have over 30 species of turtles and one crocodilian, which is the American alligator. And these are, we basically rank about third in the U.S. overall for diversity of reptiles. So we have a really high diversity. We actually are number one for turtles. But today's topic is lizards and snakes. And most people know what a lizard is. Most people know what a snake is. I'll probably show you at least one lizard today that is often mistaken for a snake. But the idea is we have some amazing diversity here in Alabama, as we do for many other groups of plants and animals. And I myself, as a vertebrate biologist, I've always been fascinated with snakes and lizards, and hopefully I can share some of my enthusiasm and some of my knowledge with our viewers today. Rebecca, can you go to the next slide, please? I'll plug this. This is oops. See if the slide comes up here. So this is the cover for Alabama, Lizards and Snakes. This is actually a book that was published last year by the University of Alabama Press. I'm going to recommend it if you're really into lizards and snakes. This is a great reference. It has a ton of information. It was produced by our colleagues down in Auburn, Craig Garter, who's a retired herpetologist there, Mark Bailey, and the late Robert Mount, who was a professor at Auburn. And it's just chock full of information. We actually had an exhibit of photography, some of what you'll see in my presentation today. But this is a great reference book that I'll recommend multiple times if you or your family are really interested in learning about the snakes. Because not only does it have information on their identification, but about their biology, their distribution. As you'll see, some snakes are found all throughout the state. Other species may only be found in certain areas. This book will have that information for you. Next slide. Even if you can't get the book right now, because we sell it in our gift shop, but obviously the museum's closed, and I should mention the book is available from UA Press and also from Amazon. But right now, if you want to use some online resources, I use iNaturalist a lot. A few weeks ago, I gave a talk on iNaturalist, and I've actually produced a free iNaturalist guide. And there's a URL in this slide here for reptiles of Alabama. And it just has basic information. So if you go to that URL, you can click on the individual images. It will take you to more information about those species. And that's available for free to anyone. You can actually download it if you have the iLoad app, if you go to the guide section. So it's a free, it's nowhere near as encyclopedic as the book I presented, but it's something that's readily accessible and is free. And I would encourage people to use it. Next slide. There's also a non-naturalist project on herps of Alabama. Herps is kind of a term that's often used to describe amphibians and reptiles. It comes from the word herpetology, which is the study of amphibians and reptiles. And we have a specialized iNaturalist project where you can actually submit your photos. So if you take a photo of a lizard or a snake or any other reptile and post iNaturalist, it'll be added to this project. And there are people that have various degrees of expertise that'll help identify it. So I encourage people that if you like collecting photos of animals, it's a great way to get them identified. There's also various social media resources. If you're only going to go to one social media resource, I highly recommend this particular Facebook group, the Alabama Reptile and Amphibian ID Education Group. Incredibly useful group, very active group. They will help identify your pictures. They help spread information, a great resource. It's run by several individuals I know personally, Raymond Corey and others. They just do a great job, and you can't read it, but it says the difference between scary and beautiful is knowledge. And I think a lot of people have a fear of snakes and other reptiles, and they are really good about dispelling those myths. And I really invite people, if you have any interest, and it's for all ages, definitely contact them. They actually have a live, if you actually go to their page right now, they have a video they produced a few weeks ago where they have live venomous reptiles. Several of the members do outreach with them. And there actually will be opportunities throughout the state, hopefully in the future, where you can interact with them at various public presentations. They do it at museums. They do it at public events. So it's a great opportunity if you want to see some live reptiles in person. Next slide, please. Other resources, I'll show this again at the end, but just I mentioned the first two things on iNaturalist. Facebook groups, you'll see some photographs I'm using from Derek Hoff, who's a photographer that is trying to photograph all the species of amphibians and reptiles in the state. And we actually had an exhibit of his artwork last year at the museum. And you'll see several examples of that. He's doing them on a white background, so they're quite striking images that often complement kind of in photo or in nature photos. Another great Facebook page is Jay Eubanks at Green Snake Education. He does a lot of outreach on education about reptiles. And then there's an Alabama Snakes group, which actually helps with snake removal. A lot of people, I do this locally for my neighborhood, but often people find snakes in their yards or homes and are concerned about them. If you reach out to Alabama Snakes on Facebook, they'll try to find someone locally that's a member that can help relocate the snake for you. And I do that myself. I've relocated several snakes in my neighborhood, including venomous ones. So it's a great resource. There's no reason to kill venomous snakes. Often they can be safely removed and located someplace else. And hopefully I'll convince you today that it's worth doing that because they actually provide a lot of important services and have a role in our environment. And then finally, there are other resources. A great one is alongside wildlife on Twitter. This is David Steen's website. If you actually tweet him a picture of a snake, 9 times out of 10 he'll identify it for you, and he does a lot of tremendous outreach. I'll plug his book again because it's also a great book he has about myths about snakes. And then finally, there's a link to a free poster you'll see in a bit that Alabama Extension produces that lists all 6 species of venomous snakes in the state of Alabama. And it's a great resource you can download and keep as a reference in case, because that's usually what people want to, first thing they know when they see a snake, is it venomous? So this is a great free resource you can get to keep in your home, print it out, and refer to if you ever come across a snake and really are wondering, is it venomous or not? So those are just some great resources I want to throw out there for people as we're at home. You can get all of them from the comfort of your own web browser. So for lizards and snakes, we're going to start with lizards first. Then we're going to talk a little bit about venomous snakes, and then I'll finish up a little bit with non-venomous snakes. Again, there's not enough time to cover every species of lizard and snakes, but I've kind of hit highlights of things that I think people have probably seen, or if they saw, would be interested in because they're either quite striking or have some interesting biology. So let's go with the lizards first. This lizard is probably one that everyone has seen. If you've seen any lizard in Alabama, it's probably been this, or green anole, or as some people say, Anole, Anolis carolinensis. It's our only native Anole species. And what you see here is a typical behavior that males do. Males have a bright reddish dewlap that they display to basically court females. These lizards are called, although they're called green anoles, they can be brown and some are gray sometimes. They actually change color. And they tend to be kind of arboreal, so you tend to see them on trees, bushes, sides of things. They're typically not on the ground. But this is a native species, and like I said, it's everywhere. We're fortunate to have it. It's one of my favorite species. I see them almost on a daily basis in my backyard. And they're just a great thing. And if you only remember one species of lizard, that's probably going to be it, or remember one. Next, Rebecca. If you're in the southern part of the state, you may actually start seeing a different anole. And this one, at first glance, looks very similar. This is the brown anole, Anolis segria. This is actually an introduced species. It's widespread throughout Florida. It's moving into Georgia and Alabama. So I see on iNaturalist, for example, I'll see people posting images of this species from down near Mobile. And with climate change, it's quite possible this species will continue to move north. Occasionally, it gets translocated when people are moving from South Alabama up north. Sometimes I've seen it all the way up in Huntsville. Occasionally, they get accidentally moved around. Anoles like this, much like the green anole, also get moved around in plants. They lay their eggs, and sometimes people get them indoors with ornamental plants. So green anole is also in Florida, where a lot of ornamental plants come from. And I've had this happen where I bought a fig tree, and then a lizard hatched out of the ground, the soil that was in it. And it was just an Anolis lizard that had buried its eggs in the plant pot. So just really cute lizards, completely harmless. Mostly insects, but Anolis segria, I'll point out too, is much more where they co-occur with the green anoles. They're generally more on the ground. Like they occasionally get on walls. So like if I go to visit my family in Florida, I'll still find green anoles up in the bushes and trees. The brown anoles tend to be in the ground. Next slide, Rebecca. Another common lizard I see almost on a daily basis in the backyard are eastern fence lizards. So these lizards, you often see them on walls or fences, as the name implies. They are, what's shown here is an adult. You may occasionally see ones that look bluish or have a blue throat patch or a blue chest and are doing push-ups. Those are the males. Much like the green anoles, these lizards also do little courtship displays. And the males get almost bright metallic blue throats. So you may see both of them, occasionally see little juveniles. A great place to see lizards is find a spot in your yard where there's gets good sun. And I guarantee at some part of the day, there'll probably be lizards basking out there. They like to get out there and warm up in the sun. And much like the anoles, eastern fence lizards do a lot of basking like that. Next slide, Rebecca. Here's another lizard that a lot of people have seen because of its color. What I've shown here is just one of the species, the southeastern five-line skink, Pleistodon inexpectatus. There are actually about 3 or 4 different lizard species that are related to this that look extremely similar, particularly as juveniles. And they have typically dark bodies when they're younger with kind of lighter white stripes, 5 of them as the name implies. And then juveniles often have these kind of bluish, almost purplish tails that are striking. And often we'll see them notice the tail color first. And like I said, there's several species that look very similar. You basically have to look at details, their scales on their heads and underneath their tails to actually identify them with confidence. But these are really common lizards you see running around. When they get older, some of the species lose the blue color tail. The other thing that a lot of people will sometimes find is just the tail. If you have pets like dogs and cats, my dog sometimes catches these, and sometimes you'll find just the tail. And this brings up a really interesting subject that a lot of people are aware of, but many aren't, that many lizards actually drop their tails as a defense. So often if a predator in the wild or your dog or cat gets outside there and grabs them, they'll automatically drop their tails, and the tail will continue to wiggle as a distraction while the lizard runs away. Green anoles will do this. Skinks do it. Even something I'll show you later that looks like a snake will do it. But so if it drops its tail, it's probably a lizard. That's kind of a good way to remember a difference between lizards and snakes. They have a special place where they can actually fracture that, and they will regenerate that. It'll never be completely perfect, but occasionally you'll see animals which clearly have a short, stubby, regrown tail. And it's because they probably had an encounter with a predator and dropped that tail as a defense. Next slide, Rebecca. Another common skink you'll often see are little brown skinks. These are much smaller. They don't get bigger than maybe 3 or 4 inches. And you'll often see these scurrying around the leaf litter. And they're hard to see because they really do blend in. But this is also a common skink that you'll find here in Alabama. Next slide, Rebecca. Something else which I've only seen a few times, although it's found throughout the state, are 6-line race runners. These tend to be much more, at least in my experience, much more common down near the coast. Sometimes you'll see them right along the beach, running just above sand dunes. Really distinct. They're really fast, as their name implies. They are really fast-moving lizards once they get warmed up. And again, it's something completely harmless. Next slide. And then here's something. This is something that a lot of people, when they first see, think it's a snake, and it's actually a lizard. It's a legless lizard. We have actually 3 species of legless lizards that occur in Alabama. People might ask, well, how do you know it's a lizard? It looks like a snake. One way you can tell with lizards, I mentioned, is these actually drop their tail as the glass snake. So they're called glass lizards because they are known to drop their tails. But even without that fact, if you look closely at it or saw one up close, although they lack legs, they actually have eyelids. So most lizards have eyelids that they can open and close. And they also have a small ear opening. It's hard to see on this photo, but lizards do have a little external ear opening, whereas snakes do not. But this eastern glass lizard, I haven't seen one yet in the wild, although they are throughout the state. Really shiny looking. They're actually a type of alligator lizard. If anyone's ever from the West Coast, the alligator lizards out there have legs as well. So there are legged alligator lizards, and there are legless alligator lizards, which we call glass lizards. So it's a great trivia quiz. Sometimes people, ask, like, how do you distinguish a lizard from a snake? If you think about glass lizards, they have all the features that lizards have except for the legs. And actually, outside of Alabama, legs have been lost in lizards multiple times. There actually are some skinks that lose legs as well. It's a common occurrence. So these things look like snakes and move like snakes, but they're truly lizards. Next slide. And then I want to finish up. The last lizard I'll talk about today is actually another introduced species. Is one that is actually now throughout the state. We remarkably don't have any native geckos in Alabama. But we do have at least this introduced species, the Mediterranean house gecko, Hemidactylus turcicus. These are kind of unusual. They're primarily nocturnal, and they're also a species which tend to be associated with human beings. So I have found these, for example, all over the UA campus. I found them at Smith Hall, where the museum is, where our museum collections are. People report these all over the place. They're unique in that they can actually climb walls. They have, as most people realize, geckos have toe pads which they can adhere to, so they can climb almost any surface. You often see them at night around lights. So that's a really common place to find them. And sometimes you'll find them, particularly in colder periods, in areas which have warmth. I found them in like utility boxes. They're giving off a little bit of heat in the winter. But the best place to probably find these, and although they're introduced, they really don't causing any problems because we don't have any geckos or nocturnally feeding lizards. They really aren't out competing any of our local species. And you'll find sometimes the little hatchlings of these are quite small, only about 2 inches. And full grown, they only get up to about 3 or 4 inches. They have really good skin. Sometimes if you grab them, their skin will tear off them, much like the tailautotomy, which they can do as well, is an escape mechanism. So really interesting lizards. I love geckos. Like I said, we don't have any natural ones, but this is the one kind of cute introduced species that we have. So that's all I'll talk about for lizards out of the 14 species we have in the state. Rebecca, are there any questions?
We have
I'll take some lizard questions now before we move into snakes.
Yeah, we do have a comment here from Caleb saying we have a couple 5-line skinks living in our backyard in the wood pile. So is that a pretty common occurrence? Yep. Do they like to do that?
That's pretty common. They love cracks. I have a crack in my front porch that is a great hiding spot for them. So they like to hide in there, and then you'll see them. Like I said, when it gets sunny out, they'll come out to bask. Like I said, 5-line skinks are they're multiple species. So something like I tell people, it's definitely a pleistodon species. It's definitely a 5-line skink, but there's unless you catch them and actually look at them, which I often do for iNaturalist. If you go to my iNaturalist observations, I sometimes, if I can, will catch the lizard so I can make a positive ID. We'll get a close-up of the underside of the tail. Some species have in large scales in the middle, some don't. It's really interesting. I mean, there's some things it's hard to identify from a single photo, and I find these kind of 5-line skinks in that group, unless you've got really high-resolution photos.
Yeah, Mary Beth says.
Okay, if there are no other lizard
yeah,
like
Mary
potted
Beth.
plants, I see that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting to note. All right. Well, I did have one.
You find them around their house. Yeah.
I had one question, John. So you showed a slide of the gecko. Are the geckos noticeable because of their eyes? Is that how you can tell a gecko versus any other kind of lizard?
Yeah. It depends. You notice, you point out geckos, the ones we have here, like the Mediterranean, they really don't have eyelids. Their eyelids are actually fused and transparent. There are some primitive geckos which don't occur in Alabama that actually do have eyelids. But what really makes them a gecko, I think the best trait are their toe pads, those adhesive toe pads. When you look at them, they look like little ridged things, but they have these amazing structures where they can actually use van der Waals forces to attach to substrate. So, the idea they can climb up a piece of glass, I mean, it really doesn't stop them. And they have claws as well, so they can use those to climb. But generally, surfaces that most other lizards couldn't climb aren't a problem for geckos. So they can be anywhere. They literally are. I think of Spider-Man. He moves like a gecko, climbing upside down. You'll see them everywhere in between. And that's a superpower that they have that is probably the best way to identify a gecko.
I'm surprised there isn't I'm going to have to do some research on that and see if there is a gecko superhero. I don't think so. Not that I know of.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Rebecca's really into the superhero world, and she's a great resource for that. So if you have questions that tie natural organisms to, I'm kind of fascinated by it because I study living organisms. Rebecca has the kind of same knowledge and passion about comic books and all the spin-offs of those. So she's just an encyclopedia. So we get together, we talk about different superheroes and their superpower, and I'll say, oh, this superpower comes from this gecko or something like that. It's really fun.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I can teach you something because you teach me stuff all the time.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. We all know something about something that someone else doesn't, and it's just amazing the kind of common interest you can come up with when you start talking about what you're just passionate about things. And this is a great example of that.
Yeah, I've actually got Green Arrow on today.
Oh, you got okay. So if there's no more questions about lizards, I'll move on to venomous snakes because that's probably what most people want to hear about. Right. Like I said, we only have 6 venomous species in Alabama.
Actually,
But they're the ones that people care most about. I'll wait till Rebecca gets up there. A presentation. So, What you see on your screen now is actually, this is a free poster. You can actually go to the URL that's on the screen right now. It's at the Alabama Extension, and we'll let you download a copy of this poster that has all 6 species on there, and there's some information about how to identify them. In general, I recommend not picking up a snake unless you know what it is with some certainty. There are people that have picked up copperheads and small rattlesnakes thinking they were something else and haven't bitten. So, you know, you sometimes will see people up snakes, and probably 9 times out of 10, it's a non-venomous snake. Just as a general rule to play it safe. There's no reason to. If you have any suspicions, don't pick up the snake. You can just take a picture of it and have it identified. So that's kind of my advice. But this is a great poster you can download from the Alabama Extension office, and just keep it handy as I go through here, or even after this. Just if you see something in your backyard, you can pull out that sheet or pull up the PDF and make a determination. Well, oh, it doesn't look like what I thought a copperhead looked like, or what a timber rattlesnake might look like. Okay, Rebecca, next slide. So this is probably the most common venomous snake that people are bitten by in Alabama. It's the copperhead. They're very cryptic looking. The best way to identify them, they're vipers. All but one of the venomous species I talk about are in the viper family, which includes copperheads, water moccasins, and rattlesnakes in our area. But they're kind of best identified by these, what I like to think of as Hershey kiss shaped markings. So these darker markings tend to be Hershey shaped kissed, or if you take the wrapper off a Hershey kiss, I guess, would look like. Very typical. Juveniles of copperheads sometimes have yellow to greenish tail tips and will wiggle them. So a lot of times, there's certain parts of the year we see people find juvenile copperheads, and they may be very boldly colored, but they almost always have a very distinctive yellow or greenish tip to their tail that they lose as they get older. So these are really typical. They don't get super big, but they're super common, and they tend to do well even in urban areas. They're almost every year I've been in Alabama, these turn up in the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, at the Birmingham Zoo, Mountain Brook, very urbanized areas. They don't require big areas to survive, and they're really omnivorous. They eat everything from cicadas, frogs, lizards, other things, even other snakes occasionally. So really common. So probably if you're going to see a venomous snake, this would probably be the most common one you would encounter. Next slide is their close cousin. Actually, this is another picture. This is one of Derek Hoff's, pictures of a beautiful copperhead. So I mentioned he has this project. He's trying to photograph all the reptiles of Alabama. And this is a captive specimen he took some photos of. But you'll see, I think for all the venomous ones, I give 2 photos, so you get a good chance to look at some variation. But again, clear as day, these large Hershey chocolate-shaped kisses on it. Next slide. Related to copperheads in the same genus are cottonmouths, or sometimes called water moccasins. These are one and the same snake, cottonmouth water moccasin. They tend to be associated more with water. They tend to be more darkly pigmented. The name cottonmouth comes from their defensive display here, with this particular cottonmouth coiled up, opening its mouth, exposing itself. This is a really typical defensive display. And this brings up a really good point. There are, and maybe people believe out there, that copperheads and water moccasins will chase you. This is complete myth. They really aren't. In most cases, they want nothing to do with you. This is true of all snakes. They move towards you, but they're doing it just to get away from you. You just happen to be between them and where they want to get you to hide. In general, people that get bitten by snakes, because they've stepped on them accidentally, which is quite possible to do. Some of these snakes are cryptic. Or, unfortunately, some people, usually it's males that are slightly inebriated, pick them up. Also get bitten. But you can be bitten by copperheads working in your garden accidentally. People reaching behind bushes, not looking. So, in general, most human encounters with venomous reptiles where there's any kind of injury are accidental, not due to aggressiveness of the animals actually trying to bite some. Most of them, they eat small prey. They just want to be left alone to eat their frogs or lizards or squirrels or mice, whatever they're preying on. And here's another, next slide, Rebecca. Another slide again showing that defensive display. In general, there are cases when you can get very light colored cottonmouths that will look like cotton heads, But typically their cottonmouths are much darker overall. Sometimes they'll almost be completely black. They're most likely to be confused with like a non-venomous water snake you'll see a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide. Other vipers that people are familiar with are our three. Actually, we have 3 rattlesnake species. The timber rattlesnake is the most widespread. These occur primarily in northern Alabama, middle Alabama, not as much on the coastal plain where we get more of the diamondbacks, but this is what they typically look like. They tend to have a rattle, as their name implies, and every time they shed, they add a little rattle to that. So you can sometimes age snakes. A bigger snake often have more rattles on them, or occasionally they will break off. So it's not a perfect estimate of age, but in general, because they add one every time they shed, larger snakes will have them. This is a species I haven't seen yet myself in Alabama. I found their rattles. I actually found a rattle of one in my house, in my yard. So I know historically they have been here. They actually, just last week, there was a small child near Huntsville that was actually accidentally bitten by one that was in his driveway. So people do encounter these, and in general, they're not aggressive. If you need someone if you find one, you can actually contact that Alabama snake group, and someone will help you remove it for you. Next picture. This is one of Derek Hoff's pictures. Again, notice the pattern on this. So they typically do have this pattern, typically a very dark colored tail, usually a dark stripe on the head. Sometimes people say that the heads of vipers are diamond shaped, and it depends on how you look at them. Then it's not always the case. So in general, there are rules, but I can show you photos of rattlesnakes in which their heads don't look diamond shaped at all. So it's not always the perfect guide. So let's contrast this one. This, like I said, the timber rattlesnake with the eastern diamondback, which we get down. This one, as the name implies, it has a diamondback shaped pattern on its back. These get quite large, get over 6 foot in length, and are typically, when you see really big rattlesnakes in Alabama, it's usually one of these. They get bigger than our timber rattlers. But again, they're mostly on the coastal plain, much more common in southern Alabama. They don't get up and people will claim they get up to like Huntsville, but all the rattlesnakes up there, as far as we know historically, and ones we see today, are the timber rattlesnakes. Next slide. Again, another pattern. You can see that diamondback pattern where the name comes from. This one is it's hard to see the rattle. It looks like it may have lost a few rattles at the end. But again, it's got a very distinctive pattern. As the name implies, they will rattle their tails as a defensive measure. Even some vipers without rattles, and even some Coluber or non-venomous snakes will also shake their tails. But they don't have a true rattle. Only the rattlesnakes have the true rattle. So those are the 2 big rattlesnakes. The next rattlesnake I'll mention, the third one we have in the state, is the pygmy rattlesnake. This is a very small rattlesnake. They don't get much bigger than about 1 foot long. And again, they're found throughout the state, but are not nearly as common. I haven't seen one of these in Alabama yet. They're here. I remember growing up in Florida, I would see these there, similar species. And the next slide, Rebecca, another picture of these. They're kind of grayish in color. Again, they have the rattles are so small in these, sometimes you don't even hear them when they rattle. But they can be variable in color, gray, reddish, brown. Like a lot of these things, a lot of snakes are quite variable, and there will be exceptions. Sometimes you find really dark individuals, sometimes really light individuals, sometimes very patterned. Again, this adds a little bit of confusion for identifying them. But people that are familiar with these, there are a lot of, as far as there are people that, or as many people that don't like snakes, there are as many people that do. And there are a lot of people you can turn to, a lot of resources to help identify these things. But this is a good example. I think if you weren't familiar with, you might not recognize this was a rattlesnake. You might mistake it for something like a common water snake. Next slide. So the last venomous snake we'll talk about is in a different family. So the first 5 venomous snakes I talked about are vipers. Their venom tends to be, hey, I saw Derek just had a comment there. I want to thank him for letting us use his photographs. Amazing photographs, and they're purely for education purposes. So thanks a lot, Derek, for letting me use your photos, not only for our exhibit last year, but for my presentation today. But going back to the vipers all have what are known as hemolytic venoms. So they actually cause a lot of swelling and tissue damage. Ideally, they're designed for killing small mammals. So they'll bite a chipmunk or a mouse or a squirrel. It will kill the prey item, and then the snake will swallow it whole. So that's what it's designed for. But occasionally they will bite people, and the venom has the effect of causing tremendous swelling. Sometimes the biggest issue is not so much the venom itself killing you, but the damage it does to your tissues. It sometimes produces a lot of dead tissue, necrosis. People have lost fingers by being bitten on just the finger. So that's the thing to be aware of. There are anti-venoms. So if you do get bit, definitely dial 911. There are anti-venoms. So for example, that small child up in Huntsville that was bitten by a timber rattlesnake received anti-venom, will recover completely without any issue. So that's vipers. The last snake we're talking about here is an elapid. So this is related to cobras and mambas and things like that. This particular snake has a neurotoxic venom. And again, you're unlikely to be bitten by it. It does have very small fangs, but they're quite colorful. So most people know, at least in Alabama, this works. Red touch yellow, kill a fellow rhyme. That works in Alabama, but it doesn't work for all coral snakes. It won't work in South and Central America, but for here, just remember that. So you see in Derek's photo here how the yellow band touches the red band. That's our one native coral snake, the eastern coral snake. And again, they're not particularly common, not aggressive at all, but you can imagine a child finding one of these, and because of its color, being attracted to it, picking it up. So again, this is the eastern coral snake. So those are the 6 venomous snakes. There's only 6 venomous snakes you have to be concerned about. I'll stop now to answer any questions about venomous snakes, because usually that's what the most interested in snakes. And I'll do my best to answer these. Let's see here. There's Derek. Oh, actually, so Derek, so I mentioned all the white background photos you see are actually Derek's photos. Very talented photographer. And he mentions the first venomous snake he ever caught was a pygmy rattler in Bluff Park, Alabama. So that's great. Again, it's on my wish list. I actually actively seek out venomous snakes. I haven't found one yet. This is on something hopefully I'll see in the not too distant future. But yeah, it's a great experience. Yeah, copperhead, definitely. Copperheads, I mentioned there, like I said, almost every summer there are copperheads reported in both the botanical gardens and in the zoo. There's enough farms there to support them, enough small prey for them to eat. So they're very common. And like I said, it's something that happens almost every single year. And unfortunately, people have been bitten by them, even people cleaning in their garden. So they are particularly common here in central Alabama. They're definitely more active. So this is a great question about snake active. So you can see snakes almost any time of year of Alabama, depending on where you are. They're obviously more active in the summer. Snakes are cold-blooded. They also are active not only hunting for prey, but also for breeding. So sometimes people report seeing snakes fighting. And I haven't witnessed this myself, but sometimes you will see 2 copperheads or 2 cottonmouths or 2 rattlesnakes, looking like they're tangled with each other, fighting each other. And those are often males that are fighting with each other for access to female snakes in the area. So you'll see active. So they definitely are more active in the warmer periods, even warmer days. Occasionally we'll get a warm period in the winter or fall where snakes will be much more active. So usually when I'm looking for snakes, I try to find a nice plenty and where they will often be basking. Often when I do walks along streams, I'll look for branches above water that are in the sun, because that's where often you'll find water moccasins or cottonmouths and water snakes basking. They're just trying to warm up their bodies. So that's definitely true. Snakes are more active when it's warmer, whether it's on a short term during a day or kind of in season with the weather. Any other questions, Rebecca?
I think that's
venomous snakes.
I think that's it for the questions in the comment section. But feel free to drop us lines.
Some time at the end where people can ask their questions again. So let's move on. So we've touched on lizards. We've touched on venomous snakes. Let's talk about non-venomous snakes, because again, the vast majority of our snakes that are in our state are non-venomous, of no medical concern. So I don't have time to go through all of them. They're all equally beautiful and interesting. I'm just going to show some more common ones, things that I myself have seen locally, and things that a lot of people will post pictures of. The first one is the common garter snake. This is actually growing up in New York, one of the first snake species I ever saw. Has a wide range. We do get them here in Alabama as well. I saw one just actually a few weeks ago behind my house. I was out doing some nature observations for iNaturalist and saw one in the woods, the first one I'd seen in my yard. Typically dark snakes with light yellow stripes. Again, they have actually technically a mild venom that they'd have to chew on you, but they would cause no medical issue for you if you were bitten by one. And again, they're generally harmless. Most snakes, if you pick them up, well, they might try to bite you. What they're more likely to do is defecate on you. That's something a lot of snakes do. They musk you, which is something that a lot of people have had that experience, or sometimes will smell it if someone's handled a snake, an awful smell. It's either the excrement of the snake that may not smell great, or kind of a scent that they put out as well. Next one, Rebecca. This is a super common snake, brown snake, or sometimes called Dekay's brown snake, or Dekayi. These are tiny little snakes. They get under a foot in length, and I find them all the time in my yard. Sometimes when I'm moving leaves, completely harmless, but very beautiful snake. It eats insects primarily, slugs, snails. Again, completely harmless and super common in most people's neighborhoods in Alabama. Next slide. Here's something a little more colorful. Again, harmless. The ringneck snakes, they often have an orange or yellow colored band around their necks. And this one, sometimes there's a little bit of a defensive posture. Sometimes they will roll their tail over, and you can see they're also this color on their venter or bottom surface. Again, it's mostly just startle predators, completely harmless. Again, a very small snake. That are quite beautiful. You have nothing to fear about. A lot of people think when you see something colorful, it's warning me that it's dangerous, it's going to bite me. This is a case where it's more a distractor predator. It's not warning you that it has any type of venom you need to be concerned about. Next slide. A super common snake, gray rat snakes. We see these all the time. Anyone that keeps chickens in Alabama knows about these snakes, or even people that are into birds. Snakes, I'm just showing you the gray rat snake today. Corn snakes are related, are notorious for climbing abilities. These snakes you'll sometimes see climbing on trees, particularly pine trees. They will eat young hatchling birds and eggs, and people that check nest boxes or have chicken coops, once they find your chicken coop, they'll come back repeatedly to eat the eggs or the chicks. They're well known for that. Completely harmless snakes, so and they get quite large. They can get up. I've seen some approaching 5 or 6 feet. Completely harmless, but really good snake climbers. And again, like I said, I've seen these in my own yard. I've seen them crossing the road here all over the state. Super common snake, super harmless, and they're quite docile. Often, rat snakes in general, a lot of them are kept as pets, and they calm down really easily with handling. So again, but I could see someone not being familiar with the snake and thinking it might be a rat. People sometimes take them for rattlesnakes because sometimes their pattern maybe looks similar to a timber rattlesnake if it's in some kind of debris or in the brush. Completely harmless snake though. Next one, Rebecca. Here's another snake which a lot of people sometimes confuse. This is one of our water snake species. So we have several species of water snakes, all in the genus Neurodia. This is the most common one that I've seen. We have a subspecies here that's called the Midland water snake. These are a snake I find a lot. I don't know if Jackie's watching today. There's a local UA student here, Jackie, who she loves to walk the local parks, and she names all the water snakes. And I've run into her. Actually, ran into her a few weeks ago in a local park while we were properly social distancing but doing nature observations, and she showed me where she had spotted a juvenile snake basking on a limb over a local creek. And again, these are beautiful snakes. They tend to be more boldly patterned when they're young. These ones, though they're non-venomous, water snakes in general tend to be kind of aggressive if you pick them up. So sometimes people that think, and they're often mistaken for cottonmouths. So I think this is a snake that's often, particularly if they're more darkly patterned, are often mistaken. And they can get heavy-bodied. We have some other related species of water snakes that are patterned a little bit more like cottonmouths. So this is probably this snake and its close relatives are those that are probably most mistaken for water because they're in the same habitat. You may literally see them, 3 feet away in the same creek bed. If you're out there, enjoying a creek in Alabama. Next slide. And then I'm going to do some kind of more colorful snakes because these ones are kind of unmistakable because of their color. If you see a green snake in Alabama, it's going to be a rough green snake. It's the only green colored snake that we have. Although these are throughout the state, I haven't seen one yet. These ones are really neat. They're often you see them in vegetation, kind of hiding. They tend to be primarily feeding on insects and spiders. So unlike a lot of snakes, they're not eating other vertebrates. They're eating primarily invertebrates, but completely harmless. And like I said, you sometimes will not even see them because they're so well camouflaged because they're often in green vegetation, hiding or actually looking for their prey. And you'll occasionally see them in trees. But like I said, if you see a green snake, not a problem. Yep. Next one, Rebecca. So I showed you early on I showed you a yellow, black, and red or orange snake, the eastern coral snake, which is venomous. We have a couple of snakes which are not venomous, which might be mimics, or at least to someone who's not familiar with snakes might look similar. One of these is the scarlet snake, shown here, completely non-venomous, not a risk to you, but it does have that. The way you can distinguish this from a venomous coral snake, the first one being the bands. As I mentioned, red touch yellow, kill a fellow. Here you have red touch black. That rhyme, friend of Jack's, finished the prose, works here. So in this case, the yellowish bands touch the black bands, not the red touch yellow, where it would be diagnostic for eastern coral snake in Alabama. So, and then the next one is another beautiful snake, Scarlet Kingsnake. Beautiful snake. Actually, these ones are again, they're throughout the state, but not particularly common. This one, if you look at it carefully, it shows you some interesting snake behavior. It's eating a skink. So it's eating one of those 5-line skinks that we saw earlier. You can see a little bit of the blue tail behind the snake's body there. But again, these ones have a really boldly patterned, but the rhyme holds is red touch black, friend of Jack. So it's different than the coral snake. But people will sometimes kill these, mistaking them for coral snakes. Someone actually found one of these in my neighborhood last year and killed it before I could find it, thinking it was a coral snake. Happens all the time. Again, if you see a coral snake, or even if you're not even certain, it generally is going to not provide any harm. It's not going to be aggressive, and if need be, you can contact someone that will safely remove it for you. But more likely, you're going to probably either see a scarlet snake or Scarlet Kingsnake, both non-venomous species. Next slide. A favorite snake of mine here is the eastern hognose snake. Again, these are non-venomous to people. They actually do have a little bit of venom. If you're a toad, that may work in you. I love these because they are like they have such a great the behaviors. One of their behaviors shown here is that they play dead or play possum, where if you bother them enough, they'll roll over, open their mouth, and play dead. The snake is not harmed. It's perfectly healthy, but it's trying to convince you, thinking you're a predator, that it's dead and alone. Next slide will show what they look like right side up. Here's one of Derek's beautiful photographs. This is a dark or black individual of the hognose snake. They come in different patterns. You sometimes see ones that are reddish or brown colored with darker spotting patterns. Sometimes they're completely black. They all have that upturn. They get their name hognose. They have a specialized nose that's upturned that helps them dig. But that's kind of diagnostic to them. And again, if you find one of these, they sometimes will hiss at you. They will flatten their heads, often kind of like a cobra. And then if you disturb them a little more, they will play dead. So I love them for their behaviors. They tend to be specialists on eating toads and frogs and have some ability to deal with the toxins actually that are present in toads. But a beautiful species we have here in the state, one that I wish was more common. Next slide. Another black snake. So I think the theme here was I was going to finish up with some dark colored snakes. Another super common black snake we see here are black racers. that I saw one just the other day. I was out literally walking in my yard, and I saw a black snake moving in the road at high speed, and I knew immediately what it was. It was a black racer, Coluber constrictor. The name racer reflects the fact that they move really fast. Juveniles tend to be kind of brownish with spots, but as they get older, they get completely black except for their heads, which they usually retain kind of a light-colored nose and light-colored lips. Next slide is one of Derek's photos of an individual doing, again, this is a really typical behavior of black racers. They do what we call periscoping, where they stick their heads up off the ground, often while they're moving. So sometimes I've actually seen this in a grassy field. You'll see a snake. You won't see its body, but you'll just see its head moving along. Just imagine the body was covered by grass or something, and the head was moving across the screen. That's a classic black racer periscoping, and much like a submarine periscoping, sticking its head up, looking at. These are visual predators. They're looking for prey items, looking for potential predators of them, but incredibly fast-moving snakes and are great snakes. And then the last slide, or next, actually, this is the second to last. Another black snake you'll find here are the king snakes. So I showed you earlier a scarlet king snake. Most king snakes that we'll see here tend to be not brightly colored, or not at least with reds and yellows. Here's a eastern king snake. They're black, sometimes with yellowish. Ours vary. Some are almost completely black. Interesting about these snakes is they eat other snakes. And unfortunately, when people kill these, they actually increase the probability of venomous snakes. So they eat copperheads. So there have actually been studies done where people have documented when you remove, or when people in public have removed king snakes and other snakes that eat snakes that are non-venomous, you get increases in venomous snakes like copperheads. So this is a case where by inadvertently killing a non-venomous species, you inadvertently increase your chances of encountering potentially a venomous snake. Completely harmless. They, again, much like rat snakes, a lot of people keep these for pets. They tend to be very docile. There are all kinds of related king snakes that are available in the pet trade. But in general, they're quite docile snakes that all they want to do is find other venomous snakes to eat. And this snake would gladly eat a copperhead if it came across it and possibly provide a service to you. Next slide is, I think, one of Derek's pictures, a beautiful one showing their color, where you get a little better sense. Sometimes, like I said, they'll almost be completely black. But again, I just love Derek's photos because they really contrast nicely with kind of the natural backgrounds, but you get a better sense for the beauty of these snakes, how exquisite the colors. I haven't focused on details. Some snakes have smooth, shiny scales. Some snakes have scales that have little keels or ridges on them. And then the final snake we're going to talk with is something that is a really interesting story in Alabama. So this is the eastern indigo snake, which we find down only in the southern part of the state. Actually went extinct due to human extirpation. Humans killing them and killing gopher tortoises and ruining gopher tortoise habitat had effectively wiped out these beautiful snakes. These are, if you've seen one, it's by far my favorite species in Alabama. Really super glossy snakes. They get large, over 6 feet in length. Again, they specialize in eating other snake species. But they were completely wiped out from Alabama. But thanks to the efforts of several groups, people at Auburn University, Zoo Atlanta, Orleans Society, and others working here, they've been reintroducing them. They have been basically taking stock, relocating juveniles from Florida populations and elsewhere into Alabama and radio tracking them. And they've been doing most of this in Connecticut National Forest, but the early signs are they are surviving, growing. I think they actually I don't know if they've actually bred yet. I can't remember if that's happened or yet. Someone may chime in here. There are many people that are involved in the project directly that may know, but our hope is that these beautiful snake species will be reestablished in Alabama. And go to the next slide, because I want to finish up with Eric's photos, because you really get a view of how beautiful these snakes are, their heads. These are just super glossy snakes. I've had the opportunity to see some captive specimens that are used for education purposes in the state. And I hope within my lifetime, I can see native-born species that have been reestablished in the state. This is really kind of our panda. I think it's just a really charismatic snake. And like I said, we've are bringing it back from extinction in the state of Alabama. And I'm really proud of that fact. I'd like to point out to people that if you love snakes, definitely if you can support the people that are doing this work, because I think this is a vital part of our natural heritage of Alabama that, like I said, unfortunately wiped out. And I didn't mention, but several other of our reptile species, several of the snakes are also threatened or endangered in the state. And, one thing that I feel strongly about, we still have, unfortunately, in the state of Alabama, a rattlesnake festival that unfortunately kills a lot of rattlesnakes for sport. I'd like to put a plug out to we need to eliminate that. I want to educate people about snakes. We don't need to kill them to educate people about snakes. So with that, I think that's my last slide. Actually, my last species slide. Let's go to the next slide here. Again, plug the book, Snakes of Alabama, which I said is available from University of Alabama Press. Once the museum's open, again, we have it in our gift shop. You can buy it right now from Amazon. If you want to get a copy while you're still working from home. I also want to put a plug in for, if you're really into the biology of snakes, David Steen's book, Secrets of Snakes. I mentioned David earlier. He's a graduate of Auburn. He did a lot of work about conservation of reptiles, still very active on social media, on Twitter. If you tweet him a picture of a snake, he will tweet back identification of it. So if you're into snakes or have kids that are, it's a great book. It really just dispels so many myths about snakes. I touched on a few of them, about their aggressiveness, their behaviors, but he really dispels a lot of the myths. And snakes are really, a lot of people don't realize snakes do incredible things biologically. Snakes give live birth. Some snakes have parental care. They communicate with each other. They just have a really fascinating biology that a lot of people, once they learn about, really changes their ideas about protecting these animals. They're not just these cold-blooded, venomous things we need to protect ourselves and families from. Next slide, if there is one, Rebecca. Yep, again, the resources. I mentioned these before. There's some on iNaturalist, the free guide, the HERT project where you can submit your own photos, various Facebook groups that will help with identification. If you have questions, they're all run. Most of them are run by people I know personally, and I want to support their efforts because much like the museums, UA museums, we're all about education. We really want to educate people in Alabama about the natural world. And we do it through the museum and our programs, but there are also other groups that are doing it through Facebook, David Steen's Twitter feed, and then finally, Steen's Storeria. Derek is plugging that book. I'm embarrassed to say I don't have a copy of David's book here home with me. I need to get one for my son, so when he gets all done to read, we can read it together. But with that, Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you for any last-minute questions.
We did have a question from Derek about he'd love to find a ringneck with the orange belly. Is there a regional difference for yellow or orange bellies?
I believe there is. I would have to pick up my copy of Lizards and Snakes of Alabama, which I do have at home. But I believe, I've seen ringneck snakes throughout the eastern U.S., and they definitely do vary in color. I've seen some that are quite yellow. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure some geographic variation that's associated with that color difference. But even within populations, I think there is some variation as well. And that's true of almost all the snakes. I've shown you pictures of the general patterns and pigmentations, but there's always exceptions. As you know, sometimes there are albino, there are melanistic individuals in some populations. Thanks, Caleb, for the plug. Again, Caleb's a professor here at UA who does outreach as well.
Yeah, I think that it looks like that's it for the questions. So do you have any last-minute thoughts about the Lizards and Snakes of Alabama?
Sure. Again, people can reach out to me through the museum's website. I don't know if you can post my email address there, or my email is jpfriel@ua.edu.
All right.
And
I'll get that.
Someone asked about talk about thick body compared to skinny. I'm not sure if that question is about venomous or I mean, there are some snakes in general. Some of the vipers do tend to be heavy bodied, or much heavier bodied than some of the non-venomous ones. I'm not sure. I think that's might be what that question's about. The other thing I'll plug is I'm going to be doing next month, or actually in a few weeks, I guess it will be, I think it's still in May, a similar talk about frogs in Alabama. I'll focus a little bit more on their calls. Again, we're trying to pick on natural history topics, which I think, given the weather and time of year, that are really topical. If you're around water now, particularly at night, you'll be hearing frog calls. So my next kind of outreach event will touch on that particular topic. So if you've got frog questions, if you want to interest in frog calls, definitely join me again when I talk about those in a few weeks.
If I have a toad question, does that count? I know toads and frogs are a little different. Okay, because I saw American Toad recently.
Totally. It's one of these things. The toads are just a type of frog. It's kind of like tortoises and turtles. So when someone says toad, I know what they mean, but technically all toads are frogs, but not frogs, or not all frogs are toads.
Good to know.
So toad questions are absolutely fine for that question. So they have beautiful calls, and you can identify them from their calls. And we have some really cool toad species in the state of Alabama.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you for your presentation and for showing us lizards and snakes in the state of Alabama. I feel more educated on the subject, so I appreciate it. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this Museums from Your Home live stream. We'll be doing this every weekday, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. And each day will feature a different aspect of UA museums. Tomorrow on Friday, we're actually going to be having our Family Friday. So we're going to be coming back to the Alabama Museum of Natural History's Facebook page. So join us for that if you want to learn more about the historic uses of plants. And if you are enjoying what we're doing here, you can actually support UA Museums through give.ua.edu/museums if you'd like to become a supporting member and support the programs and the education that Dr. Friel was talking about that we do here at UA Museums. You can actually follow us and subscribe on YouTube if you would like at youtube.com/UA Museums. You'll never miss a live stream that we do if you subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you do want to find out more information about what we're doing here with Museums from Your Home, you can go to museums.ua.edu/museums from your home. It will have the schedule of the live streams, the archived live streams that we've already done. It also has links to educational resources from the Alabama Museum of Natural History, from Discovering Alabama, from Moundville Archaeological Park. So if you have any kids that want to do some things with the museums, there's some great educational resources there at that website. All right. Well, thank you to everybody who left us comments and questions in the comment section. And thank you to everybody for watching and for visiting UA Museums from your home. All right. Well, have a great day, everyone. And thanks for joining us.
Yep. Bye, everybody.